All right, y'all. I've only been gone for like 2 days, and I have more updates than I thought was possible. So let's jump right into it here. The Washington Post says, after a call with Putin, Macron convinced that the worst is yet to come, and Russia wants to take all of Ukraine. This last part I view is fairly obvious, especially since he is invading all of Ukraine. So that would be a good hint that indeed he wants all of Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin called French President Emmanuel Macron on Thursday in what appeared to have been a markedly more tense exchange than previous conversations between the two leaders. The 90-minute call failed to deliver a diplomatic breakthrough, and a senior French official said it left Macron convinced that the worst is yet to come and that Putin aims to take control of all of Ukraine. Quote, "Your country will pay dearly because it will end up as an isolated country, weakened and under sanctions for a very long time," Macron told Putin, according to a French official who added that Macron called on Vladimir Putin to not lie to himself. So what this tells me, guys, yet again, is that there is secret high-level communication between Russia and China, and that they had some sort of a deal cut behind the scenes where if the sink gets thrown at Russia, Russia can sort of rely on China in order to bail them out. Because if Putin was doing this and felt like there was no plan B, he just wouldn't be doing it because it tanks the entire Russian economy, makes them an isolated pariah state. And even though I think to some extent he doesn't care because he's an authoritarian leader, he also doesn't want to go down in the history books as like the worst Russian leader of all time, even among Russians. So I think there was some sort of a secret deal cut. I think this is further evidence to those ends. USA Today says Russian cats are the latest to be banned from international competitions after Ukraine invasion. This is just indicative of a really disturbing and widespread trend now of like flat out xenophobia and bigotry. And you're seeing like a lot of Russian celebrities and performers are also being asked to like come out and publicly denounce Putin, and if you don't, then you're going to be banned from fill in the blank, whatever it is that the people in question do. And this also goes hand in hand with Russian vodka being purged, not just by individual small business, liquor stores or whatever. You have states, over 10 states, passing laws saying we're going to ban Russian alcohol. It really, really is astounding stuff, and I expect a lot more of this to come. It reminds me of what happened after 9/11, when anybody who looked vaguely brown was discriminated against at a much higher rate. So we're doing that now, just with Russians. Breaking. Russian oil giant Lukoil calls for halt to Ukraine war. See, again, this is interesting because it shows you a split from within Russia, and I think many of the oligarchs are looking at Putin like, what the hell are you doing, man? Because the oligarchs had a sweet gig. They had a sweet deal. They made all the money in the world. They basically own a country, and when you're on top, you don't want things to change. And now things are clearly changing, and changing for the worse, even for these people. And so there's definitely a split internally in Russia, and it's manifesting with stuff like this. Video verified by the New York Times shows the bombardment of Chernihiv, Ukraine, on Thursday as smoke cleared from the attack, which hit near apartments, pharmacies, and a hospital. People are seen running in the street. So, yeah, I watched this video before, came on air here, and that is indeed what you see. Here, I guess I'll play a little bit for you. If I get copyrighted, I get copyrighted. It is what it is. Projectiles. Wow, they caught him midair like that? Oh, Jesus. Yeah. And I think they'll zoom in and show the people running. Yeah. Yeah, it's just... So again, this speaks to its complete and utter misinformation when people say, civilian areas aren't being targeted. They absolutely are. Now, you can make the argument, well, if he really wanted to, he could unleash the nukes. True, but this is a similar argument that I hear the Israeli apologists make. Israeli apologists always say, Israel could end it in a day for the Palestinians if they really want to, so therefore they're showing like moral restraint by only doing apartheid and settler colonialism and checkpoints and rampant discrimination, etc., etc. It's just a weak argument. So anyway, no excuse whatsoever for bombing apartment buildings, pharmacies, and a hospital. That should go without saying. And there are a lot of other videos like this floating around out there now, and it's very disturbing. U.S. opens direct line of communication with Russia's defense ministry to avoid unintended conflict near Ukraine. This is welcome news. It's welcome news because it shows that, there's some sense among the people in power, like, oh, okay, this could spiral out of control, and at the very least, we want to make sure that we have a direct line of communication, and we could be clear about our intentions, and they could be clear about their intentions. And even though there's a lot of escalation going around in every which way right now, it's good to know that at least this is happening, although, this is the tiniest silver lining in the world. In a major blow to Russian troop morale, the commanding general of the Russian 7th Airborne Division has been killed. So this is the guy right here. This reporting is in The Independent. That is, as they say, a major blow. Later on in this, I'm going to get to some of the numbers that are coming in of Ukrainian civilian deaths, but also Russian troop deaths. And again, you got to take every single thing you see from on the ground at this point in time with a grain of salt. Because, you got Russians are doing pro-Russia propaganda, Ukrainians are doing pro-Ukraine propaganda, so the numbers are going to be skewed. I mean, the numbers I tend to trust the most are from, the international community. So, like UN numbers, when they come out, they're a lot more trustworthy. But even those you can maybe take with a grain of salt because it's so hard to know exactly what's going on in the moment when the fighting is going on. Responding to mass protests against the war, Putin announces that families of soldiers killed will receive payments of 12 million rubles and 2.8 million plus monthly welfare if they are disabled. So there is, a lot of domestic unrest in Russia right now. There are a lot of protests. A lot of people are being arrested for protesting the war, which, by the way, is further evidence that it makes absolutely no sense, and it's counterproductive, and it is bigoted to target, average Russians, because they didn't do it. They didn't pull the trigger. They didn't call for the invasion. Many of them oppose what Putin is doing, and they're out there fighting like heroes in order to push back against this, only to turn around and have the West spit in their eye. So this is Putin basically doing damage control. And I'm sure there are a lot of stories of troops who, were on the border. They thought they were doing some sort of drill. And then when Putin called for the invasion, they were shocked. Now, I'm also sure the opposite is the case. I'm sure there's some ultra-nationalists who couldn't wait to invade. But the world is a complex place. And human beings are complex and multifaceted and nuanced. And so, any sort of collective punishment is really dumb and really unfortunate, and we're seeing a lot of that now. But make no mistake about it, this is Vladimir Putin definitely doing damage control. So here's these 3 headlines from BNO News. Breaking: Russia's State Duma approves bill making it illegal to publicly discredit the use of armed forces. So basically, disagreeing with the war is illegal and punished by up to 5 years in prison. Russia's State Duma approves bill criminalizing the encouragement of foreign sanctions, punishable by up to 3 years in prison. So if you support some sort of sanctions over the illegal and offensive invasion of Ukraine, you can get up to 3 years in prison. This is literally just criminalizing disagreement and dissent. This is criminalizing saying, hey, I am against the policy that you are actively pursuing. Russia's State Duma approves bill criminalizing false information about the army, punishable by up to 15 years in prison. So this is just whatever the Russian government declares fake news, they can lock you up for up to 15 years based off of that. So the translation of this is, if you have a pro-Ukrainian position and an anti-invasion position, you can be in prison for up to 15 years. Now, here's a hilarious piece of context to add to this. This is at the same time that the Russian government is slamming the U.S. Government for, effectively banning RT America. And they're going after corporations here in the U.S. and social media platforms here in the U.S. for doing like a purge of pro-Russian content. And you know what? You know what I say to that? I say, hey man, fair enough. I want to allow all that stuff. I want to allow every different perspective. I would keep RT America on the air. I would keep, these big social media platforms allowing that kind of opinion and those arguments and, a narrative that counters the mainstream view here. Of course I would allow that. But you can't criticize the West for these things as you actually not only do that, you made it worse. You took it above and beyond. You literally want to lock people up for disagreeing with you on it. And this is on top of the fact that recently Russia bombed the TV tower in Kyiv, or just outside of Kyiv. So it's kind of amazing here how governments with a straight face will condemn and criticize an enemy government for the same exact things that they're doing. And again, in this instance, what Russia is doing is worse. Nobody's getting 15 years in prison for publishing quote-unquote false information in the West. So this is really, Julian Assange, of course, is an example of somebody who has been, basically locked up and they threw away the key for publishing real information about what the U.S. deep state is doing. But in regards to this war, nobody who's out there saying, I agree with the Russian perspective, the Russian government's perspective on this war, nobody in the West is getting 15 years in prison for saying that. So it's really an incredible full authoritarian crackdown that's currently happening. And this is not to give a pass to the crackdown that's happening in the West. Again, I would allow RT America to stay on the air. I would allow every dissenting voice imaginable on the big social media platforms, etc. But you guys already knew all that. Now, Jeremy Corbyn came out and said this: Putin must immediately withdraw troops from Ukraine and engage in constructive political dialogue. A shocking humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding that must end now. So I'm not going to read the whole statement here. You guys can, if you'd like, you could just pause the video and read through his entire statement here. But I find this interesting because Jeremy Corbyn he's one of the people who really, really stresses how NATO's expansion led us to this point in time. But based off of what his comment is here and the tone that this sets, it leads me to believe that even he now is of the perspective that, this definitely isn't all about NATO. Again, you guys know what I've said on this. I never would have expanded NATO in the first place. And is there an outside chance that maybe Putin never would have done anything like this if we never expanded NATO? Yeah, I guess so. But in all seriousness, it's probably only a 10 or 15% chance because he had a laundry list of grievances against Ukraine. And he cited all of those grievances in that long speech that he gave announcing the invasion. And I find it weird that so many people just overlook every other claim that he made, every other argument that he made. He was talking about how he thought Ukraine was a fake country, and the Soviet Union built up Ukraine and made it what it is, and now they're in debt to us, and then they turned their back on us and went with the West. It was a very blood and soil fashy speech. There's no denying that. And a lot of people just disregarded everything Putin said in half of the speech. Well, Jeremy Corbyn was somebody who really, really stressed NATO's expansion and how that led us to the brink. But now even Jeremy appears to be saying, look, okay, let's keep it real. What Putin is doing here is aggressive. It's an invasion. And so he needs to stop it. This is his war, and it is absolutely a war of choice. Chechenia's leader tells Putin to unleash a blitzkrieg of savagery in Ukraine and, quote, finish it all in a day or two. So this is to remind you guys, Ramzan Kadyrov is his name. This is to remind you guys, it could always get worse, dog. It could always get worse because they're attacking, civilians and civilian infrastructure right now. They're sort of stalled on the way to Kyiv, at least at the moment as of this recording. But it could always get worse. Remember, Vladimir Putin not only has nukes, he has more nukes than any other country, including the United States. And so the nukes could always be in the air, or Putin can go a step further and unleash a next level blitzkrieg, even above and beyond the blitzkrieg that they attempted with the initial invasion here. And apparently the leader of Chechnya is an absolute psychopath, maybe an order of magnitude worse than Vladimir Putin. He's also massively anti-gay, by the way, but so is Putin. But anyway, that's a different conversation for another day. Video confirms the world's largest plane, the Antonov AN-225, was destroyed at Hostomel Airport in Ukraine, ending days of conflicting reports. So yeah, they had the biggest airport. They had the biggest airport, or excuse me, not airport. They had the biggest airplane in the world, and it was destroyed in the war. That's, I mean, that sucks. Oops. Statement from Ukraine's nuclear agency after battle for Europe's largest nuclear power plant. So Russia was shelling a nuclear power plant, and this led to absolutely widespread mass panic the other night. Because, of course, you could have, you know, a Chernobyl-level disaster if there's a meltdown. But this is what we learned after the fact. So after the night of shelling and fighting, we basically learned the next day, or at least late in that night, Russia has taken control of the power plant. The fire has been extinguished. Now, for a while, firefighters couldn't get in there. So everybody was like crossing their fingers like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what are we about to witness? The critical systems are intact, and there is no radiation leak. So this, all in all, I know this sounds insane to say, but given what the news was when it first broke, this is actually the least bad scenario imaginable. Because the way it sounded was like, oh my God, they're just absolutely going to level a nuclear power plant, and there's going to be some sort of a meltdown that we can't do anything about. And we're going to be looking at a new Fukushima or a new Chernobyl. And thankfully, as time went on, we learned that Russia seized control of it, but there wasn't a meltdown. And so, but listen, who knows? Again, all these things are so fluid, you never know. Like maybe we come back in a week and find out actually something else is up. But at least the information that we have as of right now, as of this recording, Russia has control of the nuclear power plant, fire is extinguished, critical systems intact, and no radiation leak. So here we have, this article came out yesterday. The United Nations has recorded 752 civilian casualties so far across Ukraine, including 227 killed and 525 injured, including scores of children. Those figures, which were calculated up to the end of Monday, have likely grown significantly as the conflict has escalated in more cities and towns across the nation. Already, the civilian casualty numbers are greater than what the UN recorded in eastern Ukraine's conflict zone between 2018 and 2021. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and take a guess right now. The numbers are way higher than this, because we're going to get to what they claim is the death rate among Russian soldiers a little bit later, and they're claiming that there are way more Russian soldiers that have been killed. I really find that hard to believe. I do. I mean, Russia's military is so much bigger, so much more powerful. They've been attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure for a while now. So I find it just completely, it's just not believable to think that there are way more Russian soldiers that have been killed in the resistance than there are civilians who've been killed in the fighting. So again, we'll get to those numbers later, but my absolute guess, which admittedly I'm pulling out of my ass here, I would say as of this moment, you have to at least double or triple the numbers that we see on the screen here. All right, let's continue. Vladimir Zelensky survives 3 assassination attempts in days. So again, massive, massive grain of salt, guys. Massive grain of salt, because in the moment, it's hard to tell exactly what's going on the ground, right? And then the other thing is, everybody's doing propaganda. Everybody's stretching claims. Everybody's, reaching on the Russian side and on the Ukrainian side. And usually things that sound like hyperbolic or untrustworthy are that. Now, having said that, is this possible? Well, absolutely it's possible. I mean, Russia is literally invading Ukraine. Zelensky has become a media darling and a superstar of sorts. I mean, he has a 91% approval rating as of, 3 or 4 days ago when I saw that poll. So it's possible. It's possible that there were 3 assassination attempts and he survived them. But at the same time, you just don't know. But I wanted to share this with you because obviously it's fascinating. There's one thing that, and I think I'm going to do a separate segment on this, the whole Ghost of Kyiv thing, this idea that, like, there was a Ukrainian fighter jet that took out, like, whatever, 5 different Russian planes or something like that. I don't remember the specifics that they said. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, I don't know about that, man. I'm not going to report on that because that seems made up. And then come to find out, it absolutely was made up. And there's been a number of things like that. The whole, like, Snake Island, remember the Snake Island thing where there was this recording that came out where Ukrainians told these Russian fighters to go fuck themselves, and then it was reported that those were their last words before Russia fired on them and killed them. Well, come to find out, that's not exactly what happened. I think that the Ukrainians were captured, they weren't killed, and so it wasn't their last words, and so there was misinformation, at least in that regard, floating around social media. And again, this is all the stuff, fog of war, propaganda on both sides, what things are reported as fact, what things are up in the air, what things are, should you question. And my general perspective is, if it sounds even a little bit fishy, if it smells a little fishy, you at least have to tell everybody, like, look, we have no idea if this is true yet. So I didn't even bring up the Ghost of Kyiv thing. I didn't bring up the Snake Island thing because my spidey senses were going crazy. I was like, this is something's off here, so I'm not going to touch it. It turns out my instincts were correct on that front. The Zelensky 3 assassination attempts thing, I just don't know. I'm just 50-50 on it, so I was presenting it to you guys, and you guys can determine whether or not you think it's legitimate. I don't know the evidence that they're presenting here, but I figured I'd throw it out there for you guys and say, take it with a massive grain of salt. Breaking, Russian state regulator announces it's blocked Facebook in Russia. Facebook is now blocked. So this is, again, the trend here is Russia is isolating itself by doing an authoritarian crackdown, and then the West is also isolating Russia by doing, massive amounts of sanctions. And they've become a pariah state. And I just feel terrible for all of the innocent people there who are now bearing the brunt of it when they did absolutely nothing wrong. They did nothing wrong at all. So it's just like total shutdown and just completely cut off from the West. It's really wild to see. All these people will die because of you. Zelensky slams NATO's refusal to establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Yeah, no. So, look, I don't want to be a dick. I understand why Zelensky himself would keep calling for a no-fly zone, but I'll just say it. This is psychotic. It's absolutely psychotic. No U.S. politician should take this seriously. No military leader in the U.S. should take this seriously. Anthony Blinken shouldn't take this seriously. It is literally Zelensky calling for World War III. He wants the U.S. to be in direct military confrontation with Russia, which is another nuclear-armed power, and it is a kind of escalation that is absolutely mental because it's not even like we're getting close to the brink of war if you do that. No, that is like we are literally at war with Russia. So I get why he would say it because he's the president of Ukraine and his main concern is protecting Ukraine. So he'll take any help he can get. But this is, not in a million years. Not in a million years would I agree to this. And anybody who even flirts with it is missing a couple IQ points to say the least. Now, by the way, we're going to get to, again, we'll probably do a separate segment on this in tomorrow's show, but we're going to talk about the new polling of the American public on the question of a no-fly zone and on other questions around this Russia-Ukraine war. And there's some pretty big findings. In fact, they're gigantic findings. But what I will say is everybody proceed with caution because the way this stuff was asked was like out of context and misleading on purpose. So again, we'll do more on that in the show tomorrow. But all I have to say to Zelensky is, look, dog, I feel bad for you, but no, I'm not going to do a no-fly zone. That is absolutely insane. I do not want World War III. That is World War III. So stop asking. Breaking, Russia's largest airline, Aeroflot, sorry, there's no way I'm pronouncing that right, and it sounds really goofy. But anyway, they canceled all international flights from March 8th. And actually, I think this is missing some context. I think they were actually kicked out of the system where you can book all the flights. At least that's what I read somewhere else. I don't remember where I read that. But again, complete and utter isolation from the world. I feel terrible for innocent people in Russia who do not deserve this. Russia bombs civilians fleeing Mariupol during ceasefire. So this is insane. So we have yet another war crime here. A ceasefire was reached to try to get out about 200,000 innocent civilians. And Russia started bombing during that ceasefire. And we'll get to another story later. I have an update for this same evacuation. So, I'll bite my tongue on that for the moment. But again, we'll get to more on that later. Absolutely devastating. There are also reports on the ground. If I'm not mistaken, this is one of the regions where the Azov battalion is located. And they also, not surprisingly, since they're card-carrying neo-Nazis, they're also really treating the civilians poorly and not allowing many of them to leave. So I feel terrible for the innocent people there who are just trying to survive and get by. And on the one hand, they have, an imperialist Russian invasion that's shelling them relentlessly. And on the other hand, they have the Azov battalion, which is seemingly trying to conscript them forcibly. Breaking news, President Vladimir Putin likened Western sanctions on Russia to a declaration of war and threatened Ukraine with loss of its statehood if its leaders continue to resist his military invasion. Okay, that last part is hilarious. Because, dog, we all know what your plan is. You're not hiding it from anybody. You're not surprising anybody here. The second that you declared Luhansk and Donetsk independent republics, everybody knew that the next step was, oh, do you guys want to be part of Russia? Oh, would you look at that? Now you are part of Russia. That's what was going to happen eventually. But now he's saying, hey, since Ukraine is resisting, maybe we'll just annex the entire thing and say Ukraine is no longer its own thing. The second you invaded the entire country, it's obvious that that's what you had on your mind, and that's what your plan was. I like how he's couching it like, oh, because you're responding and fighting. That's why I might do that. Like, no, if they didn't fight, you would just declare it yours even sooner. So I love, the ridiculous politicking. It's so stupid and it's so transparent and everybody can see through it. But I'm burying the lead here because the more important part is what you see here. President Vladimir Putin likened Western sanctions on Russia to a declaration of war. So I was warning you guys about this for a long time. That if they go full SWIFT banking sanctions, and if they go overboard with the sanctions, the Russian government said it. Hey, we're gonna say this is a declaration of war if you kick us out of the global banking system. Now, what happened was there were a lot of different provisions of SWIFT that were indeed implemented. But there were some loopholes to it. Now, since they didn't go full SWIFT, it appeared like, okay, maybe we averted a worst-case scenario and Russia's not going to view this as a declaration of war. But ever since then, there's been so many more sanctions put on Russia, namely sanctions that really hurt the civilians and try to implode the economy of Russia. And so, of course, he's going to turn around and say this is a declaration of war. I'm not surprised by it even a little bit. And I honestly believe the West overreached. I honestly believe the sanctions went way too far. Again, because the civilians are getting absolutely crushed and they're trying to implode the Russian economy. So I'm going to get to, some of the specifics of these sanctions in just a little bit here, but they are beyond devastating. They're some of the most extreme, intense sanctions I've ever seen. They're incredibly draconian. So look out, man. We're not providing an off-ramp, and we need to provide an off-ramp to find a way to not have World War III. And buckle up, man. I'm not joking when I say build those nuclear fallout bunkers. I need to get working on mine because we are on the brink. I've never seen us more on the brink than we are right now. That's for damn sure. So, for the love of God, let's provide an off-ramp. Let's try to de-escalate and negotiate. There's no other way out of this. What else are we going to do? I would have levied every sanction under the sun at Putin specifically and at the oligarchs, but I wouldn't have hurt a single Russian civilian. And now we're crushing Russian civilians, and now Putin is saying this is basically a declaration of war. Sanctions also have consequences. we act like there are these things that wouldn't spark a backlash or a response or a retaliation. Of course it's going to. And now he's saying it's a declaration of war. So reel it in. Pump your brakes. For the love of God, let's be intelligent about this. There's like this really bizarre instinct to like punish and go over the top, and not just against the Russian government or Putin, but also against the people of Russia. And that has negative consequences, and they're manifesting in front of us right now. BBC World News has been taken off the air in Russia, the broadcaster says. So yet again, more isolation, more authoritarianism. There's so many different little stories like that we could talk about. Balaji Srinivasan says, Ukraine may not become a Russian client. Instead, Russia may become a Chinese client. See, this is interesting. I wanted to show you guys this theory because I think there's merit to it. That's what I thought might happen as soon as the financial nukes were dropped, which we basically have done now. We may see China buy Russia for a song in the largest Belt and Road deal of all time after the West dropped the price. So we now know that Russia switched to the Chinese banking system after most of the SWIFT sanctions were implemented. The next thing that happened was, and again, we'll get to something on this in a little bit, but major credit card providers are now leaving Russia, saying you can't use our systems there. So China swoops in yet again to save the day and says, that's okay, you can use our payment processor. So we're being, Mr. Tough Guy over here and levying sanctions that hurt the civilians, not just the government. And China was waiting there in the wings, and they're swooping in, and they're going to cut some sort of a deal with Russia. And so China grows their influence now. This is like the Belt and Road Initiative. The U.S. does imperialism by invading countries or funding death squads and then propping up puppet dictators. What China was doing with the Belt and Road Initiative is they'll go into Africa and build a bunch of infrastructure, and then they buy the loyalty of those nations. And now Russia is being obliterated by Western sanctions, and so China swoops in and saves the day and gains another close ally. And this is leading to an amazing geopolitical realignment that, again, we'll talk more about here in a minute. But it's something I've never seen before. U.S. talking with European partners and allies to consider banning the import of Russian oil, Secretary of State Blinken says. So Europe is heavily reliant on Russian oil and natural gas. The fact that they're talking about this now tells me they have contingency plans that we're unaware of. They have other ways of getting oil and natural gas that we're unaware of. Because that's the one area that they didn't sanction when they were dropping all the other sanctions. And again, I think the reason for that was they knew they needed their oil. They knew they needed their natural gas. So they didn't touch it. They couldn't touch it. So crush the economy in every other way but leave the oil. And now they're probably getting some contingency plans ready if they don't already have them. And again, on the Russian side of the equation, Russia has to rely on China to come save the day. And if the trends hold true, then indeed they will. India as well, too, by the way, would keep buying whatever Russia is producing. Right now they buy a lot of military equipment from Russia. Russian mortar shell hits civilians who are trying to evacuate from Irpin near Kyiv, killing a mother and her 2 children. So again, more war crimes here. Play this for you guys. Jesus Christ. That's crazy to see. Shelling and war crimes in real time. Dragging somebody who's injured. God. Imagine being there. Imagine having to live through stuff like this. Crazy. All right. Breaking. Russia's defense ministry says countries which use their airfields to supply Ukraine with fighter jets may be regarded as participants in the conflict. So this has been a big issue. Originally, there were a bunch of European nations that said, yeah, we're going to give fighter jets to Ukraine. Then they backed off of it, and they backed off of it because there are no airfields in Ukraine that you can currently access to then take off from Ukraine and fight Russian troops. So you have to take off from, like, Poland, for example. Well, if you have fighter jets taking off from Poland that are bombing Russian troops, you could swear up and down that, oh, it's Ukrainian pilots and it's the Ukrainian military's plane or whatever, but Russia can interpret that as, no, NATO is bombing us. NATO is starting a war with us. So now they're doing World War III against us, or the U.S. is doing war against us. And so that is a massive escalation, and again, all bets are off. We are in World War III if that's the case. So everybody sort of pumped the brakes on that a little bit. Now, there may be some, this plan may be reemerging in a different form of, like, let's give Ukraine fighter jets. But Russia is saying that, hey, any countries that use their airfields to supply Ukraine with fighter jets, and then those jets attack us, you are participants in the conflict. So if Poland does it, for example, then Russia declares war on Poland, and again, we're off to the races. So we're really playing with fire here, man. Really playing with fire. So here's what I referenced before. New Visa and MasterCard ban. Russian banks rush to switch to the Chinese card system, UnionPay, the second largest and fastest growing global credit card network. So there you have it. This is what we were talking about. Visa and MasterCard now banned in Russia. And it's devastating. That is such a significant portion of the transactions. So here we have yet another sanction that is not targeting oligarchs, not targeting Putin, not targeting the government. It's just flat out punitive, and it's punitive against all of Russia, including Russian civilians. And as a result of that, now you have China and Russia more openly being buddy-buddy, and China growing their sphere of influence even more, and the U.S. further isolating Russia from the rest of the global community, but also the U.S. isolating itself in terms of its own power and influence. So this is, again, realignment time, baby. This is realignment city we're looking at right here. But this is a huge deal, man. Huge deal. Trump said NATO was a paper tiger, and he added of Ukraine, quote, "At what point do we say we cannot take this massive crime against humanity? We can't let it happen. We can't let it continue to happen." Look, I don't know what this means. This is Trump doing classic Trump babble, right? Like, just being an idiot, just shooting from the hip, talking off the cuff. Like, that's what this is. But, like, if we take him at his word, well, what do you want to do, dog? Do you want the U.S. to get involved? Do you want us to start dropping bombs? What do you want? Like, what exactly are you calling for here? Now, by the way, we actually have an answer, but people claim it was a joke, the other thing he said. But I don't know if it was a joke. But you can't, Trump flips back and forth every 5 seconds, so who knows? Trump used his donors that we should take our F-22 planes, put the Chinese flag on them, and bomb the shit out of Russia. And then we say, China did it. We didn't do it, China did it. And then they start fighting with each other, and we sit back and watch. Like, dog, what? Why would China bomb Russia when they are currently setting up about 415 different financial dealings with them, letting them into their global banking system and their payment processor? Like, they're snuggling up to each other as we speak. If you put a Chinese flag on a U.S. plane, Russia is going to immediately know it's a Chinese flag on a U.S. plane. Like, again, I saw some people claiming, hey, he was joking. I don't know if he was joking or not. But either way, is this the way to be talking as we're on the brink of World War III? For real. Like, this is the former president of the U.S. who might be also the next president of the U.S. And this is how he's talking about this shit. I told you guys, look, I have a million criticisms of Biden, of course. But looking at how Trump reacted with North Korea and Kim Jong-un when he was president leads me to believe I'd be terrified right now if Donald Trump was president. Because Trump was openly tweeting nuclear threats to Kim Jong-un. And he probably would have done the same shit with Putin at some point. That is not what I want to see happen. And now he's talking to a bunch of donors and floating ridiculous ideas like this. Again, I don't know if he was kidding. You guys tell me if you think he was kidding or not. I don't know. I hope he was. But, his butt buddy Sean Hannity is out there, and Sean Hannity's arguing, not for real, like we should just casually start World War III. So, Jesus Christ, man. So, take these numbers with a massive grain of salt yet again. This is from the Kyiv Independent. But the Ukrainian armed forces are claiming they killed about 11,000 Russian troops. 11,000. 44 planes, 48 helicopters, 285 tanks, 109 artillery pieces, 985 armored personnel carriers, 50 MLRS, 2 boats, 447 cars, 60 fuel tanks, 4 UAV, 21 anti-aircraft warfare. All right, so this is what they're claiming. I will tell you this. Russia claimed, at least as of like 4 or 5 days ago, which is a while ago now considering how long the war's been going on, but they claimed like a couple hundred, like 400, 500, 600, something like that, Russian troops had been killed. The UN at that time said 1,500 Russian troops had been killed. So my general rule of thumb, even though this is just a guess, but my general rule of thumb is you take what Russia's claiming and you take what Ukraine's claiming and you split the difference between them. That's like what I think is in the ballpark of what the casualties really are. But again, you have to wait for more evidence, more confirmation from reasonable sources. This right here is not set in stone, and this is one side of the fight, so take it for what it is. Evacuation of Ukraine's Mariupol fails again, stranding civilians under siege. So this is what I referenced earlier as well. They tried to evacuate a second time, and that also failed. And then finally, we'll wrap up with this one right here. U.S. officials hold Venezuela meetings amid hunt for alternative oil supplies. Wow. See, look, there's a million and one reasons why the U.S. shouldn't be escalatory and hawkish with places like Iran and Venezuela. But at a moment like this, there's a whole nother reason why they shouldn't be. If we had an open line of communication and we had eased tensions with Iran and Venezuela, then the second that you think there's going to be some sort of a gas shortage, some oil shortage or whatever, you go right to Tehran and you talk to them. You go right to Maduro in Venezuela and you talk to him. And you say, hey man, let's make a deal. This is going to be, mutually beneficial for both of us. And now, at the very last minute, after slapping Venezuela in the face 1,000 times, trying to overthrow the government, pretending Juan Guaido is president when he's not the president, like absolutely obliterating their economy 15 times over, now we go to them hat in hand and we're like, do you mind please helping us? We'd really appreciate it. With Iran, the same thing. Like, apparently, we're on the brink of another sort of Iran nuclear agreement. That agreement cannot come soon enough. I would have never ripped up the old agreement. Donald Trump ripped up the old agreement because he's an absolute idiot. That agreement was working better than anybody could have hoped for. Well, now you see, there's a whole new reason why we should have that agreement. Because if the oil flows or the natural gas flows from Venezuela and from Iran, then you're not nearly as reliant on the murderous Saudis, for example. You're not nearly as reliant on the Russian government, for example. So, I'm happy. I'm happy that we're now meeting with Venezuela. I'm happy that we're now on the brink of another peace deal with Iran. But you know what? We should have never been on bad footing with them in the first place. And the reasons why we were, honestly, it was overwhelmingly our fault. There were no, Iran was never trying to do some sort of terror attack in the United States against our people. Venezuela was never trying to do some sort of terror attack in the United States against our people. The fact of the matter is, Iran is Shia Muslim, Saudi Arabia, Sunni Muslims. There was, they have disagreements. They've had historical tensions with each other. We are so aligned with Saudi Arabia that their enemy became our enemy. And we even have psychopaths here in the U.S. that blame Iran for 9/11 when they have absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. Saudi Arabia has way more to do with 9/11 than Iran does. And so we inherited that beef. Israel also hates Iran, and we're so close with Israel that their enemies become our enemies. And so we pretended like Iran is this rogue actor who's, trying to take over the region and acted like they're a problem when they were never really a problem. They're a menace against their own population. It's a theocratic government. It's a theocratic authoritarian government. They're a menace against their own people. They're no, international menace. They're no threat to us whatsoever. So we've had this permanent hawkish war footing with them. We never should have had that. We're just upset because in 1979, they overthrew our puppet government. and set up a theocracy. But we were mad because the Shah was overthrown. He let us get the cheap oil from Iran. That's what led to the gas shortage way back in the day. But we were mad because there was a revolution and they overthrew our puppet dictator and they set up their own system. And so now we were overly critical. We weren't critical because, in principle, we want them to have a democracy. It'd be lovely if they had a democracy. But that's not why we were upset. We were upset because our puppet dictator was gone. But now, hey, maybe you make do with what you got. You try to have, a neutral footing with everybody at the very least. If there are genuine human rights violations, then there are things you can do to address that. But as a general rule, as much as possible, we want to be relatively neutral. But now, we're scrambling behind the scenes to hook up with Venezuela, hook up with Iran, get that oil flowing, baby, so that we could be more punitive to Russia. And again, I just want to be clear. At this point right now, how extreme the sanctions are, it makes absolutely no sense anymore. I mean, again, I support every sanction you could possibly levy against Putin and the oligarchs. Seize their offshore bank accounts, baby. Seize their villas, seize their condos, keep seizing their yachts. I love that. Yummy in my tummy. Crack down on the billionaires. Make them feel pain for being all buddy-buddy with Putin, right? Go to town on Putin. Seize as many of his assets as you possibly can. Make it so that these people can't even fly out of the country. Do everything you can at them, but don't you dare levy a single sanction that hurts Russian civilians. Don't you dare crack down on innocent people who had nothing to do with this, and in fact, many of them oppose it. But unfortunately, we've gone way too far. We've gone way over the top. We are now escalating. We are now asking for more tensions, asking for World War III, for real. I mean, Putin's asking for it too, with an illegal and offensive imperialist invasion of a sovereign nation. But now, in return, we're asking for it as well, because we're going way above and beyond and doing collective punishment, which is nothing but rank bigotry. So, I don't like it. The sanctions have gone too far. You got to reel it in quite a bit. And you got to provide an off-ramp for Putin. That doesn't mean it's okay that he invaded a sovereign nation. Of course not. That's why you levy the sanctions on him and the oligarchs. But where we're at right now is devastating. And it is terrifying. And if you're not terrified, you're not paying attention. But anyway, we're going hat in hand to Venezuela and Iran, trying to cut a backroom deal. But it always should have been like this. We always should have been on a more neutral footing with them. We never should have waged 1,000,001 sanctions against them in particular. They were never a threat to us. They're not even a threat to their neighbors. Venezuela's not going to invade their neighbor. Iran's not going to invade their neighbor. So, anyway, now you see why maintaining good relationships makes sense geopolitically. It's good strategy. It's nice to have contingency plans. But when we're the, biggest, baddest dude on the block, we like to throw our weight around even when it makes no sense. And so hopefully we can stop being a bully now to these countries. And that might happen. That might happen. I mean, us even talking to the Maduro government is a big deal, because until 5.5 minutes ago, we were pretending that he wasn't even president of Venezuela. We were pretending Guaido was, and he's not. Anyway, there are your updates. I got a really long, packed show for you tomorrow. Definitely come check it out. Gonna have more Russia-Ukraine stuff, but then also a whole bunch of other stuff as well. I didn't get to everything on Russia-Ukraine because I'm saving some stuff for the show tomorrow that deserves their own segments. So anyway, I love you guys. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.